I'm not talking about fads or trends. Like, I'm not talking about the clothes you wore when you were in high school that are no longer in style. Those are trends and fads, or haircuts. Mine was a fad several years ago, but I just can't do anything else with my hair, so this is the way it stays. But things like that, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what we're talking about, because those things come and go, and they'll come back. This hairstyle will come back, and I'm just hoping I have hair when it does, because I want to still be rocking it. So when all that happens, that just comes around. You know, you keep those bell bottoms in your closet, and pretty soon they come back around, and then either your kids wear them, or if you can still fit in them, then you do, and then they go back out. All those things just kind of cycle around. Those are fads and trends. But what I'm talking about this morning is culture. Culture, defined in the dictionary, Webster's dictionary, says culture is the beliefs, customs, arts, etc. of a particular society, group, place, or time. So groups, places, times, those can all have cultures, and those cultures are shaped by the beliefs and the customs and the arts of that day. So the custom, or your culture is made, it is developed. It's not something that's just there. And many things that are the cultural norm today were culturally unacceptable just a few years ago. Just not too long ago, if you think about it, the things that seem okay now, think about, if you're my age or older, think about when you were a kid and what society and what the culture was then versus now, and how things have changed. There's that thing that goes around on Facebook that says, you know, if I would have talked to my parents the way that kids do today, what would have happened to me? You would not be hearing from me this morning for sure. But parenting changes. The culture has a way of shaping who we are. If we let it, it shapes who we are, and we all just kind of fit into this big pot that's known as culture. Culture doesn't just occur. It's shaped and formed by people. People who are willing to push the limits. People who are willing to think outside of the box, or push the envelope, if you will. Those phrases that we use. But those are the type of people that shape our culture. If you think back, probably there's just a few people in here that are old enough to remember this. But Elvis, when he came on the scene, Elvis changed the face of rock and roll. What music was, Elvis changed it. He changed it with the style that he came in. With. There's quotes from the producers of what they were looking for, and they were looking for. This is a quote. They were looking for a white guy who could sing black songs. That's what they were looking for, and that's what they found in Elvis. He had the rhythm to do it, and he went out, and it was something they could sell, and he changed the music industry. Not only did he change music, but then he changed what was acceptable as far as decency. What we could do and not do. The Ed Sullivan Show only filmed him from the waist up because they didn't like the way his hips gyrated. Now we make clocks that show that. You know, I mean, now we just wish that people just danced like Elvis. If you would just dance like Elvis, everything would be fine. But culture has changed. He changed the culture. At that time, what he was doing on that stage was considered obscene. Think about that. What Elvis did on the stage, just by, doing his little leg thing like that, that was obscene. They wouldn't show it on TV. And he changed the culture. He started a ball rolling and started to change the culture. The Beatles, when the Beatles came on the scene, up until the time that the British invasion took place, when the Beatles and then bands like them became popular in America, at that time, all of the rock and rollers or all of the pop music guys were very clean cut. Like Frankie Valli, y'all probably don't even know those people. So they were just clean cut, looked like they stepped out of an office at a bank and then started singing rock and roll. That's what rock and roll stars looked like in those days. But when the Beatles came on the scene, they referred to the newspapers referred to their hair as mop tops. They just had shaggy hair, and it wasn't kept the way that most people would keep their hair, and they didn't dress, in the suit and tie and all the stuff that was acceptable at that time if you were going to be on a stage. And they broke the norm. They changed music, the way that music evolved. They changed that culture. And then they did something else that was unbelievable. They're the ones that popularized the drug scene. Things like LSD and all of those psychotropic drugs, that all came with the Beatles. Bob Dylan introduced them to marijuana. And Paul McCartney was quoted as saying, that kind of changed things. Said up until that time they had never done any drugs, and they hung out with Bob Dylan for a day, and it was all downhill from there. But it changed the culture. It changed. Drugs weren't just some thing that some guy did in an alley, but the Beatles began to popularize it. They began to write songs about these drugs, and the hippie movement was born out of that. And you see this drug culture that takes over, and it's free love and free drugs and all of this. The culture took a major shift, and these people were the ones that ushered that in. More recent, so some of you that are younger than me might understand what I'm talking about. Mark Zuckerberg invented a little thing called Facebook. Now, we reference that all the time here. We've got our Facebook pages. Most people in here have some sort of Facebook account or have at least heard about Facebook. You can't do anything nowadays without being hooked to Facebook, because that is the easiest way to get people's attention. Why is it the easiest way to get people's attention? Because that's where they spend all of their time. When I was in high school, which was getting longer and longer ago, but I graduated in 1994, so 20 years ago, I graduated from high school. I remember having a computer lab that we went to. Some of you won't understand this, but this was pre-Windows. Windows was that we were working in DOS. And we would go through, we have to type in all of these, some of you know, you type in all of these keystrokes, and then you don't know what happened? This was exciting. You do all this stuff, you fill up your whole monitor with all these keystrokes, and then a happy face would pop up on your screen. And you thought, wow, I did that. That was so cool. There was no point and click stuff. You couldn't just move pictures here and there. You couldn't talk to your friend in the next classroom over that computer. It was just stupid. I dropped it after that semester. I thought, this computer thing's stupid. It's never going to take off. I missed the boat on that one. Now, we carry in our pockets more computer power than I had then. We carry in our pockets more communication than we've ever had. In our pockets, on my desk right now, there is you have more than likely have a phone, a smartphone, they will call them. Not only can you call people, but if you just don't want to use your voice today, you can just send them a text message, and they'll just text you back. Or if you don't even want to go to that trouble, you can just spy on them and get on Facebook and just look and see where they've checked in at, where they're at. If you're an overprotective father like me, you can track your daughter with her phone. If she says she's going somewhere, I can look it up and see if her phone has made it. And I know that she is attached to that phone, so it's going to be there with her. You can do things now that just even 10 years ago was unbelievable. Culture has shifted so much. And this Facebook thing, back to Mark Zuckerberg, he has changed not only the way that we operate with computers, but he has changed the way that we operate amongst ourselves. Have you noticed? Go to a restaurant. Go to a restaurant and look at two people sitting across a table from each other. They are this close and they're not looking at each other. They're looking at their phone. They're on Facebook, or they're on Twitter, or they're checking something else. That's all because of this communication wave that has come through, and we feel so connected. We are now so connected to each other that we have disconnected personally. It's to the point that people can no longer spell correctly. People can no longer punctuate. I have a horrible habit of not starting sentences with capital letters anymore. Because that's an extra keystroke. And really, who has time? Those things that are culturally acceptable now, just 10 years ago, if 10, 15 years ago, two people sitting at a table or a restaurant full of people sitting at tables not talking to each other, all looking at some device in their hand, would have seemed like something out of science fiction. But that's the culture today. There are people in this room right now, they're going, I don't see anything wrong with it. That's just the way it's always been. My whole life, that's the way it's been. But I remember something different. I remember how culture has shifted from what it used to be to what it is now. And those are just some off-the-wall examples of the way things have changed. But what happens is, as Christians, a lot of times we struggle with modern culture and its influences in our walk. What society and what the culture has now accepted, we have trouble balancing our life living with Christ and walking with Christ. We have trouble balancing that with what society says and what the culture around us says is acceptable. Many times our popular culture, what they accept and what they say is right, is in direct opposition to what we know to be right. But we're surrounded by it. Like we talked about last, we're in the sea of gray. We're in this culture that says that if it feels right to you, then it's right. It's been titled before situational ethics. What's right for you may not be right for me. And what's right in a certain instance for you may not be always the right answer for me. And it really just depends on the situation what the ethical thing to do is. And we've blurred the line so much between right and wrong that everything in our culture has become gray. If it feels good, do it. If it feels right, it must be right. It's in our music, it's in our shows, it's in our reality TV that we're hooked on, it's on our smartphones, our computers. Everywhere we look, we compare ourselves to other people's lives and what they're doing. And we think, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. If it's okay for them, then it must be okay for me. We're surrounded by this sea of gray. But our goal should not be to follow our culture. Our goal should be to follow our faith. Our goal should be to follow Christ, not follow the culture. They popularized a phrase that they took kind of out of the Bible, that to be in the world, but not of the world. They took that from John chapter 17. I'm going to read this real quick. John chapter 17, verse 14 through 18. And this is Jesus speaking, and He's praying for His disciples. And in verse 14 He says, I have given them, He's talking to God, I have given them your word, and the world hates them because they do not belong to the world. I want to stop right there for a second. The world hates them because they do not belong to the world. There has never been in modern history a time when the word Christian was despised more than it is right now. If you're a Christian, you must be one of those right-wing lunatics. If you're a Christian, then you just want everybody to act like you. If you're a Christian, you're a hypocrite. If you're a Christian, you judge people. If you're a Christian, this. And it's despised. Why? Well, Jesus is talking about it right here. It says the world hates them because they do not belong to the world, just as I do not belong to the world. Basically, He's saying they hate them because they hate me. They don't want to live like me, and so they hate them, meaning us. And Jesus says this, I'm not asking you to take them out of the world, but to keep them safe from the evil one. They do not belong to this world any more than I do. Make them holy by your truth. Teach them your word, which is truth. And just as you sent me into the world, I am sending them into the world. We are in the world, but we're not of the world. But a lot of times when you hear that comment, I mean, they put it on t-shirts, they put it on in the world, but not of the world. But we think that we're somehow trapped in this world. If we're not careful, we look at it like, well, we're just here until finally someday we're going to go home. And, you know, we'll just suffer through here. And it's okay that everybody hates us because Jesus said that they would. And we'll just struggle along and we'll make it through. Because we're in the world. I look at that a lot of times as like being in the deep part of the pool, not being able to make it to the edges. And you're like, well, I'll just dog paddle till maybe somebody can rescue me. I'm just going to stay right here. I don't want to swim 15 feet over that way. I'm just going to stay here in the pool and maybe somebody will stick that big long blue pole out and grab a hold of me and pull me over. Surely somebody will come by. And we look at our lives that way. We're in the world. And so we have this way of just looking like we're just suffering through, and it's so hard to live the Christian life, and it's so hard to do what's right, but we're just going to trudge on and just stay here until someday we get our reward. But I don't believe that's what Jesus was saying right here. I believe what Jesus was saying right here is that I'm going to send them into the world. Just as you sent me into the world, I'm sending them into the world. That's with purpose. He didn't say, just as you stuck me in the world, you stuck them in the world. He said, I'm sending them into the world. Remember, we talked a few weeks ago about Jesus sending the disciples into the storm? Remember that? We talked about that he was up and he told them to go across the lake, and he knew there was going to be a storm, and he sent them out there anyway. Because he had a purpose. In the same way, he sends us into this culture, into this world on purpose. Not by accident. It's not like God didn't know that the culture was going to be the way it is right now. I mean, if you believe that God created everything, then surely you have to believe that if you believe He's all-powerful and He's all-knowing, then He had to know what's going to be happening. He knew the culture you were going to be in. He knew what you were going to face at work every day. He knew what you were going to face at school every day. He knew the world that you lived in, and He sent you into it anyway. Why? Why did He send us into it? Well, it's pretty simple. He sent us into the world to shape culture. Not to be shaped by culture, but to shape culture. He wants us to be one of those like the Beatles. Not exactly like them, but like the Beatles. He wants us to go in and push the envelope, to push things forward, to shape the culture. Remember, culture is shaped by those who are willing to stand out. Culture is shaped by those who are willing to live outside the norm, to do something different. Those are the people that shape culture. Somebody that's willing to take risks. Somebody that's willing to do more than other people are doing. Those are the people that shape culture, and that's what Jesus wanted us to do. But instead, what we do is we let culture shape us. We let culture shape us. We let culture tell us what's right and wrong. From here on out, I'm going to need you to hang on tight. And just know that I love you and you love me. That's not a Barney song. That's just, I need you to hold on tight here. But we have allowed as Christians, when I say Christians, I mean all, not just in this church. I mean as Christians, we have allowed society, we have allowed culture to dictate what we feel is right and wrong. We have allowed culture to come in and tell us what we can and cannot do. We've allowed culture to dictate what we say. We let a minority of people scream loud enough to scare us into submission, to not stand up for what we believe in. And exuberance to be liked and to be accepted, because we don't want to just be in the world and just struggling through. We want people to like us, and we want people to accept us, and we think that that's the best way that we can share the gospel, is if we get liked and accepted and we're just like everybody else. But what happens is we end up letting culture dictate to us what we believe. And we allow them to guide us through those gray areas instead of our faith. And what happens is when we let culture guide us through the gray areas, we get ourselves into trouble. And we water down not only our faith, but we water down our message. And when we do that, we have given up our ability to shape culture. I'm not willing to give up my ability to shape the culture around me any longer. But we've done it. We've done it as a church, as church, the church in whole. I don't mean this church particularly. I mean as the church as a whole. We get scared. We get scared to speak up on what we think is right because people say that they're going to do this and they're going to do that. You can't say anything political from your platform because then they'll take away your tax-exempt status. You can't say anything about homosexuality because it will be hate speech. We allow these things to happen, and what happens is it just keeps creeping in, and so where we may say, okay, well, we don't have to talk about that right now, and it just keeps creeping in until suddenly we've been absorbed into culture, and we haven't shaped anything. We've just become a part of it. And we don't stand up for what we know is right. And so we lay off all the hot topics. And we don't talk about homosexuality. And we don't talk about divorce. We don't talk about abuse. We don't talk about the things that are indecent in this world. And here's why. Because somewhere down the line we got off track and we tried to do it all wrong. Somewhere down the road we got off track and we tried to go through the legal system and pass laws and get people elected into places where we passed laws on people that mandated what they could do and what they couldn't do. Started back during Prohibition. The teetotalers didn't want anybody drinking, so we just passed the law and nobody's going to drink. Well, that didn't really work out all that well, did it? And we start passing these rules and these regulations, and we get ourselves off our mission. Which is instead of, if we think that you can't drink, we don't want people drinking because it's going to lead to things that aren't right, then maybe we should show them enough love to show them that there's a better way. Maybe we should show enough grace and mercy to shape our culture into a gracious and merciful culture instead of the judgmental one that it is now. We've let culture dictate to us what we could and could not do. We let people who are atheists, they go in and they go into the school, and we have separation of church and state, and so you can't take your Bible to school, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't have any monuments that are religious, and we get what happens is that just riles us up. They do all that stuff, and we just get riled up, and we get mad, and we get angry, and then we just start fighting them legally. And we get so mad about them taking God out of school that we quit putting God in people. And we act like somehow they can pass some law to keep God out of anywhere. And we're so worried that they're going to take God out of our schools that we fight that, and we fight that, and we fight that. And it really all that we have to do is just keep putting God in people. And when we keep putting God in people, then God's going to be in school. And they can say or write anything that they want to. But if people have God in them, it really doesn't matter if they say we can or they say we can't. We let them turn around the arguments on us. You take hot issues like abortion. And if you can't win an argument, the best thing you do is just to turn around the question. And so the question is no longer, do you believe it's okay to kill a baby? The question is, don't you think a woman has the right to choose? Don't you think a woman has control of her own body? Well, yes, I do. And we let them turn those things around, and instead of just loving people, we have people in the name of Christ go start blowing things up because they disagree with things. We have people standing with posters and yelling at people hateful things in the name of Christ. And the whole while I sit back and say, this is not going into the world. This is not love. This is not mercy. This is not grace. This is not what Jesus wanted. But we get caught up in culture, the culture wars, and what's going on. And we allow it to shape our arguments, and we allow it to shape our actions instead of just getting in the Bible, spending some time in prayer, and just letting God lead us. Here's the deal. If you follow culture, you're never going to shape culture. If you just follow what's popular, you just follow what's going on, you're never going to shape it because you're always a step behind. If Mark Zuckerberg would have just stayed on the computer, just kind of followed this internet thing and just saw where it led, we wouldn't have Facebook. But instead, he decided to shape where it would go. Not just follow where it was going. He decided to shape where it would go. And I think that's what God's calling us to do as Christians. That's what God's calling us to do as a local church, is to shape the culture. To change the culture. To get out of the gray areas, to get out of the darkness, and just love people. To just love people regardless what they say about us, regardless what they do to us, regardless what they think about us, that we just love people. That we just go out, we stand for what's right, we don't back down, but we just love. We were sent into this world to shape culture, not just survive it. I want to read one more passage of Scripture to you. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17 through 24 says this. With the Lord's authority I say this, live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused. Their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasures and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. Does that sound familiar? Go back up to verse 18. It says, their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life God gives because they have closed their minds and hardened their hearts against Him. People have preconceived notions of who we are and what we are. And they have closed their minds totally to that. And arguing with them will not fix that. Holding up a sign will not fix that. Your bumper sticker will not fix that. And it doesn't matter if your bumper sticker says, get Jesus or go to hell, or if it says coexist. It does not matter what your bumper sticker says. It is not going to bring people to Christ. Because their minds, they're in a culture that their minds are already hardened. They've hardened their hearts against Him. They have no sense of shame, and they live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. If you don't believe that, turn on the television. Just for a minute, and then turn it back off. I called this series Shades of Gray for a purpose. because of the books that were out and the movie that's now coming out and the trailer that's too hot for TV. And I worry because I see these, what I would consider normally healthy ladies that are going crazy over this stuff. And I'm not judging you. Please know that I don't do that. I'm not judging you, but I worry because I feel like I know what would happen if the shoe were on the other foot. And if instead it was your husband that was wanting to watch this movie or read these books. The roles were reversed. You know, sometimes we just got to call things for what they are. And instead of trying so hard to just have people like us and have people accept us, I mean, I believe people have to work out your own salvation and you have to go your own way. And we give people time to just figure things out, and we don't harp on people. What a sorry pastor I am. What a sorry Christian I am. If when something is wrong, I can't just say that it's wrong because I'm afraid that I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. You know, I'll do it in love. I don't do it out of a judgmental state. I'm not just trying to dictate your life, but I'm trying to help you live a successful life. Why would you purposely put something in your life that warps your view on what relationships are supposed to be? Why would I purposely let you do something that alters your state of mind without saying, you know, you may be headed down the wrong road? Why do we just let things happen and are so afraid to speak up and just say, you know, that might not be the best thing for you to do? I know why. It's because Christians have got a bad name because of that, because it wasn't done in love. But you know what? There's a lot of people that have got married for wrong reasons. Whatever those reasons were. Maybe somebody married for money, not really love. That's the wrong reason. I didn't do that. My wife sure didn't do that. She married for looks. No. People get married for wrong reasons all the time, and it doesn't mean that we don't still get married. Because there is a right reason to get married. It's because you found the one that you want to spend the rest of your life with. You found the one that you love more than anything else on this planet. That's why you get married. That's the right reason. And so while there might be 1,000 wrong reasons or wrong ways for me to tell you, hey, you're headed down the wrong path, that doesn't mean that I still shouldn't step up and say, hey, I love you, but you're headed down the wrong path. That's the kind of Christian God has called you to be. Yeah, I have a responsibility as one of the pastors here, but you have a responsibility as a Christian to look out for your brothers and sisters in Christ, to shepherd over your family, and to not let culture dictate what you do in any of those situations, but to let Christ dictate what you do. You shape culture. You make it culturally acceptable to go to somebody in love and correct them. You make it culturally acceptable to stand up for what's right even when nobody else will stand. You change the culture. You were put into this world for a reason. Finish up this verse, this passage. Verse 20 says, but that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from Him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. That means there are some things that you can't do if you're going to remain righteous and holy. There are some places that you can't go if you're going to remain righteous and holy, because you have put yourself in situations in the deep end of the pool where you'll just be struggling, waiting for somebody to pull you out. But here's the commitment I make from this moment on. If I see you in the deep end of that pool, just struggling, waiting for somebody to come pull you out, I'm going to pull you out. That means some people don't like me anymore. I hate that. I really do. Regardless of what it may look like on the outside, I do care what people think. But I would rather somebody not like me than to know that I had a chance to save somebody from hell and I didn't do it. Be bold. Stand out. Don't live in gray. I mean that in gray areas and in the book and movies. Don't live in gray. Step out of that. You lead people through those gray areas. You pull people out of those gray areas. You be what God called you to be. He put you into this world for a reason. Now go out and do something.